Okay, so most news you hear about the environment these days is negative and depressing. But today I'm going to be talking with Johannes Meier, who is a member of the Danthonia Bruderhof in New South Wales in Australia. And he'll be telling us a more uplifting story about work they've been doing to restore a piece of heavily damaged farmland. So Johannes, when did you first arrive at the Danthonia property?
So we arrived November 2004.
And what was the condition of the property when you first arrived there?
At the time, it was a very degraded property, having been farmed for approximately 50 years using conventional technique.
And just describe what that conventional technique was.
So, if you go back to the 60s, you had the Green Revolution with the increased use of herbicides and chemical fertilizers, increased tillage, and while those techniques did grow a lot more food, they also had unexpected and negative consequences on the ecosystem. I suppose one of the most striking things on arrival was almost no trees looking across the landscape, a lot of erosion gullies, evidence of loss of a lot of topsoil. The stream that runs through the center of the property was eroded deeply into the floodplain, and the actual paddocks had very little grass on them, and there's a lot of bare soil.
Did you start out by using more conventional methods to farm the land, and how did that work out for you?
We actually did. The property was purchased by the Bruderhof in 1999, and that's exactly what was done. We sought the advice of our neighbors and took their advice and applied those practices to the landscape, and very quickly in 2 or 3 years discovered that it was not going to make any money at all. In fact, it was costing us money to run the farm in that way.
So at what point did you start thinking about adopting a different approach to farming?
So probably I would say 2006 is where we made the commitment to trial what we call management intensive grazing. Management intensive grazing, or holistic planned grazing as some call it, is a technique that mimics nature and tries to keep the animals tightly bunched as predators would have in a natural setting, and that results in the deposit of dung and urine in a small area. It also results in the grass being grazed very evenly, and that all the grass plants in that area are grazed equally as well, so that you don't have the animals selecting the best plants and leaving the worst ones to thrive. So it's a very even grazing system, and when you have that type of grazing, what happens is that you drive the ecology and the biology underground, which is the key to landscape restoration. And so that we made that commitment to trial that on our own property, and we did on about 100 hectare or a 250 acre area. And we watched that for about 4 years. And at the end of 4 years, we had a dry period, I would call it, not a drought, but it went on for about a year. And I had been measuring biomass, grazed biomass, both on pastures that were managed with the management intensive grazing and on conventionally grazed pastures. And during that summer period, we noticed that we could graze 2 times as much forage from the paddocks that were managed using the management intensive grazing.
So in addition to management intensive grazing, what other techniques or approaches did you take to help restore the land?
Another angle, obviously, is to look at water storage. Because if you understand that we have very wet years, so let's say up to 1 meter of rain during a calendar year, and often those are 2 years back to back like that, and then you have long dry periods, you need to be thinking about how you're going to hold water in the landscape. The most powerful tool to do that is to build soil carbon. Soil carbon, or humus, is a magical defining element of soil. And by soil, I mean a living ecosystem. There are 3 main parts to restoration of soil biology. Number 1, we'd already done. That's the management intensive grazing. that has a very good effect on soil biology. The second tool to use is inoculation with the appropriate spores and cysts to actually restore these different species of bacteria or fungi back into the soil. And the best way to do that is via products like compost or compost extract, compost tea, all similar products. Obviously, compost is difficult. It's expensive to access enough compost to spread across 6,000 acres. So compost extract is probably the best fit for us at Danthonia, broad acre wise. Then comes the third tool, and now this is very fascinating. And again, it's biomimicry. It's looking at nature and replicating what we see there. And what's become clear through studies done across the world is that in order to really drive biology, you must have a large diversity of plants. There's a term that's out there called quorum sensing. And this doesn't relate to people in a meeting. This relates to enough plant species present to flick a switch, as it were, and turn on this amazing diversity in biology. And it's been found that when you can do that, you can actually put the whole restoration or regeneration of soil and of ecosystem into high speed. And soil can be built at inches per year. Whereas when I went to school, I was told it takes 1,000 years to build an inch of soil, right? Well, actually, that can be done rapidly, providing the right conditions are there, enough plant diversity. The people I work with, mostly in Australia and New Zealand, tell us that we need to be running at least 12 species in our cover crops or forage crops. And so it looks very interesting when you go onto a regenerative farm. You'll see some sorghum, corn, see some sunflowers, some beans, cowpeas, clovers, all growing in the same field. And from a sort of conventional farming view, that looks really dumb and untidy. But actually it's driving amazing soil health. There's another angle too. If you go back in history, we did not have in Australia large rivers that flowed through the landscape, but rather we had large pools surrounded by reeds, maybe a little riffle of water, big reed bed, another pool, another riffle. And so the water would pulse through these very wide floodplains, and because it was slowed down by the reeds and was moving slowly through the system, right, soaked into the landscape, just giving a lot of resilience, a lot of water sitting there that would hold in the same place for 2-3 years. If you understand how that works and then begin to try and build that. So we've done a lot of tree planting. We've tried to restore wetlands, reed beds. In the creeks, we've used plants and trees to slow the flow of water, not stop it, but just slow it and redirect it so that it's not going to continue to incise deeper and deeper into that floodplain. There's another angle too, trees on hilltops. And the reason for that is twofold. And one is that hilltops don't tend to be productive for grass, and they're also a very natural place for trees to exist. And they bioaccumulate, or they accumulate biomass at 7 times the rate of grasslands. And if you understand that gravity plays a huge role in nature also with fertility and nutrient movement, if you're accumulating biomass at the top of a hill and then it begins to rot, it's going to move downhill and feed your productive pastures and croplands further down over time. Obviously, we're talking decades, not years, but you have to think in decades when you're managing landscape. And so that's another thing we've done quite a bit of. We've probably planted 150,000 trees in the last, 15 years. And we're planting another 2,000 pretty much as I speak. We'll see how we go.
So could you talk a bit about the positive results you've seen as a result of this new approach?
I think we've seen, wonderful growth of trees, functioning tree belts and woodlots. We've seen a massive increase in ground cover, in water holding capacity in our soils. Back in 2007, we had a rainstorm with about 4 inches in a couple hours. And we literally saw water just sheeting off the hills, rushing down the valley, ripping gullies through our plowed paddocks, and disappearing down Swan Brook. We had another event like that about 2 years ago, and there was no runoff to be seen. Any water that was moving was clear. And when we went down by the creek, where the creek was in full flood from the neighbors, brown, dirty water and trees and debris, and the water flowing off our section of the land, it was clear. So yes, we've seen exciting improvements, but it's not nearly enough. And why do I say that? I'm saying that because climate change is here. And it is vicious. And it will present enormous challenges to us in the next years, decades. And unless we can get this right, Australia will no longer be a habitable place. And it will not take long to reach that. And you only have to look in the news now to see what this drought is doing to the people, men and women, families that live in the rural areas of Australia. And then if you look a bit broader, as I had the privilege to visit Arizona this year and Minnesota, you can see the effects of climate change in those places. And we hear about Africa, we hear about the Middle East. There's enormous areas of the world that are desertifying or turning to desert. Where rainfall is becoming more erratic, storms are becoming more severe, there's more heat, greater temperatures, there's also greater cold spells, and all of these things are affecting different areas of the world differently, but it's a massive challenge. And so I believe that without careful use of all the tools available to us, and utilizing wet periods when they come to the maximum, I don't believe we'll be able to survive with the challenges it faces. That being said, I think there is great hope. Many people are changing their practices, and also we have a good God above us who will look after us as well.
Well, Johannes, thank you for taking the time. It's been very encouraging to hear about this work. And if you're ever in the area of New South Wales or really anywhere in Australia, you'd be more than welcome to visit the Danthonia Bruderhof. I know they have an open door policy. I'll put their information in the description below. And as always, like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell, all those good things. And we'll see you on the next one.